Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I thought we would take a look at my tarot journals from 2019. So we're getting close to the end of the year, and this is usually the time where I start looking at my different practices and how I go about the things within those practices. So a huge part of my tarot practice is my tarot journaling. So I thought that it might be a good time to kind of take a look at what has been working for me and what hasn't been working for me as I look into moving into doing things a little bit different in 2020. So I thought first we would just talk about the things that worked really well for me and the things that didn't work well for me, as well as a couple of the most important takeaways that I've discovered throughout the year. And then I thought, just for fun, we will take a flip through my tarot journal for 2019. It's actually in two different books. Now, of course, we're not done with December yet, so I have not finished December, but we can go ahead and take a quick flip through up until maybe say November, so that we can see how my journal is kind of progressed and changed over the year. So I have my journals in two different books, and let's start with the first one. This is my first journal for the first part of 2019, and this journal actually holds my readings and reflections from January 2019 through July. And then in this second journal, I have August through December, which I hope to be able to make it to the end of the year. But I only have a few pages left, so I'm not entirely sure if we're going to make it or not. So what worked really well for me in terms of starting this journal and keeping up with it throughout the year was to actually have a base structure for each month. So this allowed me to create a consistent routine for my journaling efforts. Basically, knowing what I was going to do each month or each week really helped with that sort of blank page syndrome, where you open to a page and you're like, I have no idea what to put on this page. So having a base structure that I followed month after month and week after week was really helpful in order to keep me on task. So I had a monthly calendar. I had certain things that I tracked every month. I had done a Wheel of the Year spread at the beginning of the year, and every month I included my card of the month. I did my new moon intention. I came back at the end of each month and wrote a little bit about my reflections for the month, and I noted the decks that I used. Now, all of that worked really well for me for the most part. So I had kept a section for the Sabbats, which also worked well for me. Sometimes it was one page, sometimes it was two. It just depended on how much I felt like doing, how much time I had, and really kind of my connection to the Sabbat itself really kind of determined how detailed I got in my entries in my journal for it. Having a set structure for my daily readings was really key in the beginning to help me get that rhythm and get that routine down of how I wanted to go about my practice. That also meant that every week I knew what I was going to do. On the flip side of that, allowing myself the freedom to not be rigid with the schedule when I felt like it was really very helpful. And I had pulled a card from the Guardian Angel Tarot. I made a color copy of it, and then I just collaged onto the page. And this for me was kind of a process of reconnecting and recentering, and just kind of taking a moment away from whatever it was that was making me feel overwhelmed at that time. Later on, I came and I did this page, which has absolutely nothing to do with tarot, but that's okay. Sometimes I just pick up this journal and whatever goes into it, because that's what I'm feeling in the moment. It doesn't always necessarily connect to my tarot reading practice, but most of the time it does. But allowing myself that freedom and that flexibility not to adhere to a rigid structure when I needed to detour from it was definitely helpful. So some of the things that also that I found worked really well for me were creating these little mini booklets for my tarot challenges. Now, I started this practice in October, so I've only done it for a couple months, but having these little booklets that I can just remove to work on my tarot challenges. I had one for November, and of course I have one for December as well that I've been working on. But having these little booklets really allows me kind of the freedom to be able to pull these booklets out and to work on my tarot challenge readings and not have to deal with the bulk of my book, which is something we're going to talk about in a minute. Another thing that was really helpful to me and what worked really well for me throughout the year was to allow myself to do messy journaling. So just to throw whatever reading I had, journaling, thoughts, my interpretations, to just go ahead and write it down first on a, piece of notebook paper, and then just create little pockets to tuck them in and things of that nature. I think I did that in a couple of different places throughout this journal. Here's another one where I did a whole 9-card Lenormand reading, and I just, wrote down my reading here and, folded it up and put it in here. And that allows me to be able to kind of work through the reading without having to worry about making it pretty in my journal. I can just go back and do that later. So another, speaking of going back and doing things later, another process that worked really well for me was to, if I can find here, is to actually do my readings ahead of time on a separate sheet of paper and then come back and add them in when I have time. So I actually did this whole spread. This was a reading that I did, and I did it over the course of a week. And I just kept it on a piece of notebook paper. I did take some pictures as I went. And we're kind of getting a little sneak peek at my December journal pages because this is from earlier this month. And then I went back and I added this in into my journal as I had time to do it. Now I did, if you're interested in seeing this process, I did actually do a video, and it is in my Boho Tarot Tribe Facebook group, and you'll find a link to that in the description box below. There's a whole 30-minute video in my Facebook group as I journal and ramble through the process of putting this page together. So allowing myself to be able to do readings on a piece of paper and not have to worry about make it pretty, just get the information down, and coming back later and adding it to my journal was very helpful. A lot of the little fun things like these little fold outs and flip outs and little booklets that I made. Some of these are just fun things to do, and some of them are actually helpful for in terms of saving space. So here's another example of a little flip out that I did. So I wrote the base prompts and cards that I pulled from my reading, but my reflections are actually written down here on this little piece of paper and put into this little insert. It just provides me more writing space when I'm trying to keep things contained within a certain section of my journal. So I didn't want my full moon and Capricorn reading to bleed over into other pages. So I just created this little fold out to put the extended writings within that. And that for me worked really well throughout the year. And that's definitely something that I will be continuing to do moving into the next year. And I think the biggest thing that really worked well for me was really allowing my journal to shift as my practice grew. So if we look in the beginning of my journal, it actually looks more like a bullet journal. I have like a little vision page here. I have a manifesto. I have my wheel of the year. I have my year ahead spread. This I actually did. These two are actually quite handy. But these two honestly never really came back to again. This was just a page that I kind of collaged and did for fun. I had intentions of tracking my cards. We'll come back to that one in a minute. So you can see that it's kind of set up like a bullet journal, if you're familiar with a bullet journal. And that's kind of where I started with, because that's where I was coming from. So I'd been doing bullet journaling for other areas and practices in my life. So it just kind of seemed a natural progression to go from, to start my tarot journal with bullet journaling, because that was something that, I was quite familiar with. And so that is definitely how the journal started out. You see it's very almost sort of minimal. I do have a few pictures, and it's mostly just washi, and then my writing and things of that nature. Then we start to get into later in the year, and you can see Here's a good example where I started collaging a lot. I started adding in, here's a great example. It's a whole collage page of a card I pulled. Again, this was another one of those, just taking a mindful moment to breathe and recenter and just collage this card. But you can see here that it really did start to become more of a collage type journal. I still have quite a bit of writing in it, but I did start adding in a lot of little touches and scrapbooking and collaging, even more so in the months to come. Towards the end of 2019, moving into fall and winter, I really was collaging quite a bit in my tarot journal, which was fun, and I actually really enjoyed the process. Allowing my book to go from this sort of bullet journal, minimalistic type of layout to this more collaged, scrapbooky type of layout here really allowed me the freedom to creatively express myself through my journal, as well as, dive deep into my readings and work with my cards. Keeping with that structure month after month and week after week really helped me to solidify my journaling practice and to really help it become a part of my everyday life. So now let's talk about what didn't work so well for me, because on the flip side of having a structure, I did find that after several months of it, and really it wasn't till about the end of fall that I started getting a little bit bored with my daily readings the way they were, of doing that same type of reading, that same thing week after week after week. I do use different decks every week, so that definitely helped shake things up, but I also found that moving towards the end of the year, doing my daily pulls of just pulling one tarot, one oracle, reflecting on the message, and that sort of thing, after a while got a little bit repetitive. So again, allowing myself to be able to make those changes. In December, I started doing some different readings. You can see here I have the nested reading that I did, where this is the beginning of the reading, and then, like I said, here we have the rest of it, which is a reading that I worked on throughout the week. So that really didn't work so well for me, the regular daily pulls. Well, here you can see I did something a little bit different. Starting in November, I was pulling 2 tarot and 1 oracle and making more of a story type of reading out of it. But this sort of structure was really great to help me get started and to build a practice and to build a routine for it. But I found that I needed some variety. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to totally ditch the daily draw or the 1 tarot, 1 oracle readings, not by any means. It just means that I'm going to allow myself the freedom moving forward to add in more of those expanded readings, to mix up my practice even a little bit more, just to keep things, interesting, to keep me learning and to keep me growing. The other thing that didn't really work so well for me is that this page, as pretty as it is with the design I did around the month and the calendar and the moon phases, as pretty as it is, I didn't actually really make use of these pages. So while I enjoy creating a sort of theme for my month and including the calendar, I really don't need it to take up this much space in my journal. So I think moving forward that I'm going to maybe either make the calendar much smaller, maybe just ditch the calendar altogether and just make a list of important dates. I do like having a little sort of theme for my month, so that will probably stay the same, but this is kind of a wasted page in a sense, because it's a page that once I created it, I did never come back to really use it. I did come back to use, the pages that I'd created to help me create the structure for my month. So, listing the decks that I was working with, sometimes the new moon intention, sometimes I had time for that, sometimes I didn't. Like this month in October, I noted that I didn't do any new moon work because I just didn't have the time. So while this page worked really well for me, this page, as pretty as it is kind of just a taken up space in my journal, and it wasn't something that I really found myself referring back to in terms of it being really a usable page in my journal. So I think moving forward, I'm going to adjust that a little bit. The other thing that didn't work for me really at all, as you'll see here, was the tracking my cards. I had started in here, and I think I wrote it in pencil and I erased it because I didn't have enough room in the particular layout that I had used. And honestly, I just forgot to track my cards. And it just, again, this just ended up becoming another kind of wasted page in my journal because I created it and I didn't ever use it. Now that's perfectly okay because this is a learning experience, right? Every time we have an issue like this, where we maybe set out a goal or a practice that we like to incorporate and it doesn't end up working out, that's totally okay too. There's nothing to say that I have to track my cards throughout the year. So the fact that I ended up completely ditching this practice pretty much at the beginning of the year, like I think I may have done it through January, but I think February moving forward, I didn't at all. So the fact that that didn't work out for me is totally okay. And that's just something that's not going to work for me. So it won't be something that I even, waste my time bothering with moving forward because it's not something that really resonates with my practice or how I create my journal. The biggest thing that didn't work so well for me throughout this year was the journal itself. Now, where I like these journals, these dot grid journals, they're great size. I like the covers. I like the gray color. But because of the way that I journal, these books get really, really fat. And this is the first one from the beginning of the year. But let's take a look at the one I'm currently working in, or I'm finishing up with. This is what it looks like. And I don't even have, at the moment, my Tarot Challenge booklet in here for December. So this is what my book looks like. And trying to work in this book at this point is getting really cumbersome. It's hard to write on this side of the page because if you can see, I can push in. There's like divots in the book because I have a tendency to do a lot of things up here in these left-hand corners. It tends to be where I scrapbook a lot. It tends to be where I add, layers, a lot of layers of things. And it makes for this kind of dent in my book right here. So as you're writing, it makes it really hard to kind of write throughout the book because of the layers add so much bulk to it. And then when you get towards the back here, now this side is just really bulky. It's really hard to work on this page. It makes my writing not near as nice as it could be. It gets hard to paste things in because you've got all of these layers pressing back against it. It just became a little bit too bulky and cumbersome to work with. And that's definitely something that I'm going to change moving forward. And I'm going to be using a different type of style rather than a bound book. However, if you just write in your journals, and you don't add, or maybe just write and just include the card printouts, I think that a bound book would be just fine. I prefer the dot grid because it allows me to do more with it. It's more flexible than having the lines because I can draw, I can doodle, and the dots kind of help create a framework for that. But if you're going to include like a lot of this bulky layer, like a lot of collaging and things of that nature, like I have done, then a bound book perhaps might not be the best option for you, as it really wasn't for me. I think the biggest drawback I had this whole year of journaling was that my books are this particular book is just not big enough to contain the amount of information that I want to include in my journals. So that's just, again, because the amount of information I put in, and these are not very large books. So I think my most important journaling takeaways from 2019 is first and foremost to give myself permission to make mistakes. I do have mistakes in my journal. My journal from the beginning of the year, I missed a whole page, somehow skipped a whole page. That's okay. Sometimes I have little, mistakes. I just mark them out or I cover them up with washi. But allowing myself the permission or giving myself permission to make mistakes in my journal. Mistakes happen. Life is messy. That's okay. This journal is a reflection of me and my practice, and me and my practice are not perfect. So having those little mistakes in there, just kind of a reminder that it's okay to be imperfect. That's human nature, right? Another really important lesson that I learned this year was that it's really important to allow my journal to evolve as a reflection of me and my practice rather than trying to conform to somebody else's style. So when we're starting out journaling, a lot of times, particularly if we're journaling about something new, like I've been keeping journals for years, but this is the first year that I've really kept a dedicated tarot journal to this extent. And so I spent a lot of time in the beginning of the year kind of looking at other tarot journals and looking at other people's styles. And that's a great thing to gain inspiration, which is actually going to lead into my next important lesson. It's great to be inspired by other journals, but you need to make sure not to compare other journals to yours. It's really easy to get caught up in kind of that negative comparison. I may open up a page of my journal and go, this, like, what was I doing? This looks half-assed to me, and I saw so-and-so's journal and they had this, a similar thing, but it was beautiful and it was detailed and it looks so much better than mine. But that's okay, because to me, this is a reflection of what was going on in my life at the time. I can tell looking at this particular layout, I did not have a lot of time that day, and I do actually remember when I pulled cards this day, and I pulled cards out of habit rather than because I was really inspired to, and that's definitely reflected in my pages when that happens. And that just shows me, it's kind of a snapshot of my life, of my days. But whenever I compare that to what somebody else has done, and it makes me feel bad about myself and my journal, it totally defeats the purpose of my journal. This is a reflection of me and my practice. And when I compare it to somebody else's is going to be different because they have a different experience. The biggest, most important takeaway, which I've already kind of talked about, is to really use what works for you and ditch what doesn't. It's okay to start with a practice or to start with a layout or a spread or an idea, like I did with my tracking my cards of the year, and decide that really doesn't work for me and I'm just not going to do it anymore. That's totally cool too. Or if I decide, this scrapbooking really, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not feeling that anymore. So I switch to not doing it halfway through a journal. That's totally cool too. Give yourself freedom. There's no wrong or right way to journal. Let yourself journal in the way that feels most natural and right for you, in a way that resonates with your practice. So now that I've rambled on for a really long time about keeping a tarot journal, I do have a whole journaling series coming up in 2020. So if this is something that you're really interested in learning more about, be sure to keep an eye out for that. But let's go ahead and just take a quick flip through my journal. I do have detailed videos on my monthly pages every month. So if you want to take a look at that, I have a whole playlist. So this was the journal at the beginning of the year. As I mentioned before, I did this sort of vision board and this manifesto, wheel ahead, or wheel of the year, and my year ahead spread. Again, this was just another collage page and the cards of the year that I ended up ditching. Moving into January, we have my January pages. I did a little tree doodle. Again, I was more bullet journaling at this point in my practice. I was also pretty sick January to March, so there's not a lot of journaling in here during those times because I wasn't well. I did more expanded Sabbath readings at the beginning of the year than I did towards the end of the year, which is always kind of funny to see how that changes as well. We have my layout for March, and you see that the first part of the year was really just my calendar, notations of my decks, my cards, things of that nature, and then any Sabbath related items, and then moving on. I didn't do a lot of daily pulls until I got into April because I just wasn't feeling well enough to do it back then. So then we have my my weekly cards that I drew, some moon readings. Sometimes I did little tuck things. Here's the decks I worked with that week. I just tucked in there, experimenting with different ephemeras. Some more moon readings, my weekly draws. This was a little sheet that I had started on my favorite card pairings. I didn't ever finish that, but again, that's okay. It's there if I ever need it. Have a spread that I did. Moving into May, sometimes I did little fold outs like these for my decks I used. Sabbath spread, weekly readings. Here was a spread I did that came with the Roots and Wings, so I had just gotten this deck in, so it came with this little spread, so I did that spread and noted my reflections, and this was a card that came with the deck, so I pasted that in there so I would always know where it is as well. More readings. This was a birthday spread that I did because my birthday's in May. Full moon reading. As you can see, I didn't pull cards every day, every week. Sometimes I would miss a day and that's okay. This was just a little recentering exercise I did. This I doodled at some point in here. More readings. Moving into the summer solstice and a new moon reading. And then I think this was when I started pulling one oracle card a week to connect with, and I started with the Animalkin Oracle because I was getting to know that deck. I had included had done some tarot spreads that I have on my Instagram page and also on my website, so I started incorporating some of those as well. Here's another new moon spread, my weekly card. This was a big inner balance spread that I did. You can download this one from my website if you're interested in that. There's more weekly readings. Moving into July. New Moon and Cancer spread. My weekly pull. My weekly cards. Here was another checking in spread that I did. My full moon in Capricorn with the little flip out that we saw. Here was two spreads that I did. These are both on my my Instagram, my website, and my Pinterest, I believe. And I did them on different days, but I knew they went together, so I just saved the space. Did one, saved the space, came back and did it later on. Another little just collaging that I did when I needed a moment to reflect. Another spread, new moon spread. And I think this was the end of where I stopped, the end of July. And then I started to work through the Tarot Elements book. And this was as far as I got. So that was the first journal for 2019. And then because I filled this one, I had to move into a second journal, which is the one that I am currently finishing up. I did transfer a Wheel of the Year into this book just so I had it for easy reference, and I transferred my year ahead spread, so again I had that for easy reference. Moving into August, I had a little flip out here for my decks because I worked with a lot of decks in August. Did some Sabbaths. I tried a monthly forecast. I'd started doing a tarot challenge with the Tarot of a Lucid Slumber and just ended up dropping that off. My weekly card. Again, here's that tarot challenge that I'd started and just wasn't able to finish. I switched decks for the second week in August. I'm not sure why. I switched my oracle. Not sure why. This was just this was a short week because we were actually camping during this week, and I remember because I had the White Sage Tarot with me, and I remember doing this chakra reading while we were camping. So I came back and filled this in afterwards, these 2 pages, when we got back home. It's another full moon spread. This is Lenormand reading. So this was when I started learning Lenormand. So you'll start seeing a lot more of those in my journal. Mostly just for practice. Weekly pulls. Another spread that I did. This was a deck interview with the Textured Tarot. I started doing Lenormand every week. More pulling weekly cards. This was, I guess it wasn't in my first journal, it was in this one. I totally skipped this page. Just don't know how I did that. I went from here to here and missed the page in between, but it's totally cool. Again, mistakes are fine. Mistakes happen. This was a new moon in Virgo spread that I did. All of the moon spreads that I did were from Ethany's Tarot by the Moon 2019 booklet. She does have one for 2020 if you're interested. Here was September. Again, I did a little booklet for my decks, just, you know, for fun. And you can see all of these in a little bit closer detail in my monthly tarot journaling page videos. So this was, I think this was a Mabon reading I did, month ahead. This was the first tarot challenge that I completed, which I really enjoyed. It's the Lion Hearts Tarot Challenge. I did a wrap-up reading for it even. Pulled my card for the week. Another Lenormand reading. More cards for the week. More Lenormand. I started using, I think, a Lenormand every month, a different Lenormand every month. So just various spreads, weekly polls, daily card draws. You can see there's a lot of scrapbooking that's going on in a lot of these. But, you know, sometimes there's not much because I just didn't have any. This particular week, I was not loving the deck that I was using. This is the Inner Compass Oracle, which I totally love. But totally skipped Monday and Tuesday and only did Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I just wasn't feeling it. So you can definitely see that reflected when you look at this page compared to this page, which was a Messages from the Arcana spread that I did with the Antique Anatomy Tarot. And this is in my Tarot Bound guide. And you can definitely see the difference between the two, as I was just not feeling it this week. Obviously, I was feeling it when I did this. So moving into October, and then I have the first little booklet that I made for the tarot challenges, which was really handy. A Samhain spread that I did. Again, these were the cards, some cards that I created. These are colored copies of them that I just pasted in here so I would have. This was a reading that I did with the Literary Witches. Again, my Oracle card for the week and my weekly Lenormand, and then just moving into my normal, you'll see it starts, you know, repeating Oracle, Lenormand, weekly readings. You know, Oracle, Lenormand, my weekly readings. I do there's one here I did a check-in spread. This was a little reading, this conversation with the deck that I did, which is in here. And then a sort of wrap-up reading that I did. But for the most part, you can see that I kept a pretty consistent structure, which was really great when I was doing things like learning Lenormand. I was making sure to take time for that every week. And here's moving into November, and we have the little booklet that I created for it. Had some extra pages in it. And again, all of these are in my monthly tarot journaling videos. This was just a little booklet that I made to go with another reading that I did with the Forest of Enchantment. My funny little doodle. And then we go into December, which I'm not going to show you because I don't want to ruin the surprise of my December journaling video. But so that's basically a look at my tarot journals January through November of 2019. So I hope you enjoyed this look at my 2019 tarot journals and talking about some of the things that worked for me and some of the things that didn't. And we'll be talking about what I'm going to be doing in 2020 in an upcoming video. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.